No one noticed the first scream. There was no sound, no explosion, no headline. It didn't echo through air or vacuum. It slipped silently between numbers, buried deep inside the equations that described reality itself. At first, it appeared as a rounding error, a decimal that refused to behave, a fluctuation so small it should have been ignored. But it wasn't random. At CERN, a late-night research team noticed the anomaly while analyzing quantum vacuum data. What should have been pure noise, a chaotic background of meaningless fluctuations, began to form patterns. Subtle at first, then undeniable. The data curved in on itself, spiraling into recursive sequences that had no origin point. Equations fed into themselves, looping endlessly, but not infinitely. There was structure, intent. One of the researchers, a junior analyst named Farid, made the mistake of mapping the pattern visually. He expected static. What he saw instead was symmetry. Not the clean symmetry of physics, but something disturbingly organic. The curves resembled eyes, thousands of them, layered within one another, staring outward from the screen. Farid laughed it off at first. A trick of the mind. Pareidolia. Humans were wired to see faces in randomness. But then the pattern changed. It adjusted, as if it noticed him noticing it. He called in the others. They ran independent analyses. Different software. Different systems. The results were identical. And worse, the anomaly wasn't confined to their experiment. It was everywhere. Astronomers soon reported irregularities in stellar observations. Not changes in brightness or position, but something stranger, stars appearing to flicker in sequences too precise to be natural. Not blinking. Watching. Within 48 hours, observatories across the globe confirmed it. The entire sky had become inconsistent. Not wrong exactly, but no longer trustworthy. As if something vast was moving behind it. Something too large to be seen all at once. Governments were notified. Emergency panels were formed. The public was told nothing. But secrecy doesn't survive curiosity. Leaked data spread across the internet. Amateur analysts confirmed the same impossible patterns. Forums filled with speculation. Hoax, experiment, unknown natural phenomenon. Until the mathematicians spoke. Because mathematics doesn't lie. And the math said one thing over and over again. This is not random. Then came the blackout. For exactly 0.7 seconds, every digital system on Earth failed. Power grids didn't collapse, but they paused. Satellites froze mid-transmission. Aircraft instruments went dark. Every screen, every device, every signal, gone. And in that perfect, global silence, something spoke. Not in words. Not in sound. In understanding. Every human being on Earth experienced it differently, yet remembered it the same. A thought that wasn't theirs, pressing into their mind with impossible clarity. Cold, fast, ancient. You were not meant to notice. Panic didn't erupt immediately. It spread slowly, quietly, like a disease incubating beneath the surface. People tried to rationalize it. A shared hallucination. A neurological event. Some kind of experimental broadcast gone wrong. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. Hallucinations don't synchronize across billions of minds. In hospitals, patients began reporting identical dreams, endless black oceans under starless skies. Shapes moving beneath the surface. Something rising. Children drew pictures they couldn't explain. Spirals. Eyes. Fractured geometries that hurt to look at. Animals reacted first. Dogs refused to go outside at night. Birds altered migration patterns mid-flight. Entire ecosystems shifted as if responding to a predator no one could see. And then the second signal came. This time, it didn't hide. It appeared simultaneously across every screen on Earth. Phones, televisions, billboards, even devices that weren't connected to any network. A single image. The same pattern Farid had seen at CERN. But clearer, closer, alive. The spirals moved slowly, folding into themselves in ways that made the human brain struggle to keep up. Looking at it for too long caused headaches, nausea, in some cases, seizures. Then the image deepened. Perspective shifted, as though the screen wasn't displaying something, but opening into it. And for a brief, horrifying moment, humanity understood. We weren't observing the pattern. The pattern was observing us. Reports flooded in within minutes. People claimed the image reacted to their presence, that it followed their gaze, that it knew they were looking at it. Attempts were made to shut everything down. Power grids were cut manually. Satellites disabled. Entire networks pulled offline. It didn't matter. The image remained. Not transmitted. Not projected. Present. As if reality itself had decided to display it. That was the moment fear truly began. Not loud. Not chaotic. But deep. Existential. Because for the first time in human history, we faced something that didn't just threaten our bodies, but the rules of existence we depended on. At CERN, Farid stared at the original data feed, his hands trembling. The pattern had changed again. The spirals were widening, opening, and something was pushing through. Not fully, not yet, but enough to cast a shadow across the equations. A presence pressing against the boundaries of reality, testing them like fingers against glass. Farid whispered the only thing that came to mind. Something's coming. No one argued. Because across the world, in labs, homes, and silent streets beneath a flickering sky, humanity felt it. Not as a sound, not as a sight, but as a certainty buried deep in the bones. We had been seen, and whatever was out there had just realized we could see it too. The world didn't end in fire. It unraveled. At first, the changes were subtle, easy to dismiss if you wanted to believe everything was still under control. A building in Sao Paulo appeared slightly wrong in photographs. Not destroyed, not damaged, just misaligned, as if its angles no longer agreed with each other. People blamed camera errors. Until the building folded in on itself. Not collapsing, folding. Like paper bending along invisible creases, each floor compressing into shapes that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Witnesses described it differently. Some said it twisted into a spiral. Others claimed it simply vanished. No debris. No sound. Just absence. Then it started happening everywhere. Entire city blocks distorted overnight. Highways curved upward into the sky before looping back into the ground. Oceans rippled in geometric patterns, their waves forming perfect, unnatural symmetry. Reality wasn't breaking. It was being rewritten. The first confirmed visual contact came from a weather satellite over the Pacific. The footage lasted 3.2 seconds before transmission cut out, but it was enough. Something vast moved beneath the clouds. Not swimming. Not flying. Existing. Its form refused to stay consistent. Every frame showed something different. An endless mass of shifting geometry, like a living contradiction. Angles that shouldn't meet intersected freely. Surfaces folded into themselves and emerged elsewhere. And scattered across it, eyes. Or at least, things that resembled eyes. Thousands of them, opening and closing in no discernible pattern. The footage leaked within minutes. The internet didn't crash. It froze. No one argued about authenticity. No one called it fake. Because everyone had already seen something similar. In their dreams. In reflections. In the corner of their vision when they looked too long at the sky. Governments declared global emergencies. Militaries mobilized. Evacuation protocols were issued for major cities. But where do you evacuate when the threat isn't bound by location? The first engagement happened in the North Atlantic. A naval strike group, already on high alert, detected an anomaly beneath the surface, something massive, displacing water without creating waves. Sonar readings returned impossible results, distances that changed between scans, shapes that couldn't be mapped. Then it rose. Sailors later struggled to describe it. Not because they didn't remember, but because their memories contradicted each other. Some saw a towering mass of black tendrils, stretching miles into the sky. Others described a smooth, featureless shape that absorbed light entirely. A few claimed they saw nothing at all, only felt an overwhelming pressure, like their thoughts were being squeezed. The fleet opened fire. Missiles struck first. Then railguns. Then nuclear payloads authorized in desperation. The ocean erupted in light and heat. For a moment, it seemed to work. The shape faltered. Its form destabilized, flickering between configurations as if struggling to maintain cohesion. Then it adjusted. The explosions didn't stop, they slid. Warped around the entity as though space itself refused to let them connect. One missile was recorded curving mid-flight, bending at a perfect right angle before disappearing into the sky. The entity responded. Not with force. With attention. Every system on every ship failed simultaneously. Not destroyed, ignored. Screens went blank. Weapons powered down. Communications dissolved into static. And then the crew began to scream. Not all at once. Not in unison. One by one. Each sailor reacting to something only they could see. Some clawed at their eyes. Others laughed hysterically. A few simply stood still, staring into nothing, whispering words no one could understand. Within minutes, the entire fleet was silent. Adrift. Empty. When recovery teams arrived, they found no bodies. Only ships, untouched. As if the people inside had never existed. That was when the realization set in. These things didn't just break reality. They interacted with something deeper. Something human. Across the world, similar encounters unfolded. Military bases overrun without a single shot fired. Entire populations disappearing from sealed environments. Surveillance footage showing people simply walking away, following something no one else could see. The entities weren't attacking in the way humanity understood. They were reaching in, learning, mapping the structure of human perception the same way scientists dissected unknown organisms. And for some, that contact didn't destroy them. It changed them. In a research facility in northern Germany, a containment team observed a subject who had survived direct exposure. A young woman, mid-20s, found wandering near a distortion zone. She showed no signs of physical harm, but her brain activity told a different story. Her neural patterns were expanded, not damaged, not degraded, extended. When questioned, she spoke calmly, almost peacefully. "They're not what we thought," she said. "They don't see us as enemies." The lead researcher leaned forward. "Then what are we to them?" She smiled faintly. "The way you see a shadow on the wall. Interesting. Temporary. Not entirely real." The pause. "They're trying to understand why we notice them." Before anyone could respond, every monitor in the room flickered. The lights dimmed. And the woman's expression changed. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. "They remember us," she whispered. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Frost spread across the glass panels, creeping outward in fractal patterns identical to the spirals seen in the original anomaly. "They shouldn't," she continued, her voice no longer entirely her own. "This layer isn't supposed to look back." Alarms blared. Containment protocols activated. Armed personnel rushed in. Too late. The space around her thinned. Not violently. Gently. Like fabric being pulled from the other side. Her body didn't break. It unfolded. Stretching into angles that extended beyond the room itself, her form intersecting with spaces that weren't there seconds ago. For a brief moment, everyone present saw something behind her. A vast, watching presence. Ancient. Curious. Hungry. Then she was gone. No trace. No residue. Only the lingering distortion in the air, slowly settling back into something resembling normality. The official report labeled it as a containment failure. But the researchers knew better. This wasn't an invasion. Not yet. It was something far more unsettling. A reconnaissance. And humanity had just confirmed the one thing it was never supposed to. We could perceive them. And now, they were starting to perceive us back. The pattern was supposed to be simple. Across time, across galaxies, across realities humanity couldn't even comprehend, the entities had encountered other civilizations. The outcome had always been the same. Observation. Consumption. No resistance. No deviation. Intelligent life, when exposed to something beyond its understanding, followed predictable pathways. Panic, denial, collapse. Minds fractured under the weight of incomprehensible truth. Societies disintegrated. Reality itself became unstable under the strain of perception. It was efficient, reliable, proven. Humanity did not follow the pattern. At first, the entities didn't notice. The early stages proceeded as expected: localized distortions, psychological degradation, pockets of mass disappearance. Entire regions of Earth went silent, their populations erased or repurposed. But something lingered. Fragments. Survivors who should not have survived. In a quarantined zone outside what used to be Warsaw, a small military unit held position far longer than projected. Drone surveillance showed them operating normally within a distortion field that should have rendered them catatonic within minutes. Command assumed instrumentation error. Until the audio came through. Static-laced. Broken. But clear enough. It's still here. The pause. Heavy breathing. It's inside the perimeter. We can't see it, not directly. Gunfire erupted in the background. Short, controlled bursts. It keeps trying to. The transmission cut, replaced by a low, rhythmic interference. Not random. Not mechanical. Something like breathing. Recovery teams were never sent. Not because they couldn't, but because by then the pattern had begun to shift. Reports like this were no longer isolated. In Tokyo, a subway operator exposed to a localized distortion continued working for 6 hours, calmly rerouting trains while describing shapes moving through the tunnels. His final recorded statement: "It doesn't understand why I'm not afraid." In Argentina, a rural community survived direct exposure for nearly 3 days. When evacuation teams arrived, they found the inhabitants alive, coherent, and changed. They spoke of the entities not as invaders, but as observers. Confused ones. "They expected us to stop functioning," one survivor explained. "Like everything else they've seen." The interviewer pressed further. "Why didn't you?" The man hesitated, then gave the only answer he could. "Because we've already lived with worse things in our heads." That answer spread faster than any official report. Because it wasn't just poetic. It was measurable. Neuroscientists began analyzing brain scans from survivors. What they found defied expectation. Exposure to the entities should have caused catastrophic neural overload, patterns too complex, too contradictory for the human brain to process. Instead, something else was happening. Adaptation. Neural pathways weren't collapsing. They were rerouting. Human brains, shaped by millions of years of threat detection, stress, imagination, and fear, were doing something unprecedented. They were absorbing the impossible. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough. Psychologists noted a disturbing trend. Individuals with prior exposure to trauma, combat veterans, abuse survivors, those with long-term anxiety disorders, showed higher resistance to entity-induced breakdown. One classified report summarized it bluntly. Humans accustomed to internal chaos demonstrate increased tolerance to external incomprehensibility. In simpler terms, the things that broke other species felt familiar to us. The entities noticed. For the first time, their behavior changed. Not retreat. Not aggression. Hesitation. In multiple encounters, the entities paused mid-interaction. Distortion zones stabilized briefly. The usual patterns of mental intrusion, overwhelming visions, forced perception shifts, became inconsistent. Almost cautious. As if something about the human mind disrupted their process. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from a black site research facility, location classified even within top-level clearance. The subject was a soldier, recovered from a high-intensity distortion zone after being presumed lost for 48 hours. By all known metrics, he should have been gone, either physically erased or mentally destroyed. Instead, he was sitting upright in a containment room, hands resting calmly on the table, watching the observation glass. "They're still here," he said, before anyone asked a question. The lead researcher leaned into the microphone. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head slightly. "Not in the room. Not like before. But they're close." The pause. Listening. The room temperature dropped by several degrees. "Can they understand us?" the researcher asked. The soldier smiled. Not reassuringly. Not really. That answer should have been comforting. It wasn't. Why not? The researcher pressed. Another pause. They don't think like we do. They don't fragment. The word hung in the air. Fragment, the researcher repeated. The soldier tapped his temple lightly. We're not one thing in here. Never have been. We're contradictions. Fear and logic. Instinct and reason. We imagine things that aren't real and react to them like they are. His smile widened slightly. They expected something consistent. The lights flickered. Cameras glitched. The soldier's gaze shifted, not toward the researchers, but somewhere behind them. They're trying again, he said quietly. Trying what? To understand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every person in the observation room felt it. A pressure. Not on their bodies. On their thoughts. Something vast, brushing against the edges of their minds, probing gently. Carefully. And then, it recoiled. Violently. Every monitor in the facility surged with static. Several screens shattered outright. One technician collapsed, clutching his head. The soldier didn't move. They don't like it, he said. Like what? Someone whispered. He looked directly at the glass. At what's inside us. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because everyone there understood, on some level, what he meant. Humans weren't stable. We weren't unified. We carried fear, imagination, memory, trauma, all layered, all active, all conflicting, to something that existed as a singular, incomprehensible whole. We were chaos. And chaos was unpredictable. The soldier leaned back slightly, still smiling faintly. For the first time, he said almost thoughtfully, they're not sure what to do with us. The first time it happened, no one believed it. Not because it was impossible, but because it was wrong. Everything humanity understood about the entities, every model, every theory, every desperate attempt to classify them, pointed to one conclusion. They couldn't be harmed. Not physically. Not conceptually. Not at all. They weren't bound to a single state of existence. They slipped between dimensions like shadows between light. Weapons passed through them. Energy bent around them. Even thought, when forced outward in raw panic, only seemed to feed their awareness. They weren't alive in any way humanity could define. So they couldn't die. That assumption lasted until Subject K-17. Dr. Amara Khatri didn't set out to create a weapon. She was trying to answer a different question. Why did some humans survive contact? Her research focused on cognition under extreme stress. Brain scans from survivors showed something extraordinary, not resistance, not immunity, but translation. The human mind wasn't rejecting the entities. It was attempting to interpret them. Badly. Incompletely. But enough to maintain function. And in that flawed interpretation, something unexpected emerged. Distortion. Perception defines interaction, Dr. Khatri explained to the panel, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. We assume they're beyond harm because we're trying to affect them on their level. She brought up the neural mapping data. But they're interacting with us on ours. A general leaned forward. Get to the point. Dr. Khatri didn't hesitate. What if we stop trying to understand them and force them to understand us? Silence followed. Then skepticism. Then, reluctantly, approval. The project was authorized under the highest classification level. They called it Cognitive Projection Interface. The concept was simple. The execution was not. Using quantum-linked neural arrays, the CPI allowed a human mind to extend beyond the physical body, not as consciousness transfer, but as imposition. A way to push human perception outward into the same layer of reality the entities occupied. Not to observe, to interact. Subject K-17 was the first viable candidate. A former soldier. High resilience to distortion exposure. Psychological profile marked by extreme adaptability, and a history of trauma that, under normal circumstances, would have disqualified him from any experimental program. Here it made him ideal. He sat in the interface chamber, wires and conduits mapping every neural pathway in his brain. Around him, containment fields hummed softly, precautions against something no one fully understood. Dr. Cattry's voice came through the intercom. Remember, you're not trying to see it clearly. Don't force structure. Let your mind respond naturally. K-17 smirked faintly. Yeah. That's usually the problem. Not this time, she said. This time, it's the solution. The chamber darkened. The interface activated. At first, nothing happened. K-17's body tensed as his brain activity spiked off every measurable chart. Monitors flooded with data, patterns too complex to interpret in real time. Inside his mind, the world shifted. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He wasn't anywhere. There was no ground, no sky, no orientation, only presence. Infinite. Watching. The entity. Not as humans had seen it before, not fragmented, not filtered through limited perception, but closer to its true form. And it noticed him immediately. A pressure formed around his thoughts, probing, dissecting, analyzing. The same process that had broken countless minds before. But K-17 didn't resist. He did something else. He let it in. Not fully. Not passively. Deliberately. You want to understand? He thought. The presence pressed deeper. Curious. Confident. Unchallenged. K-17 smiled. Then try this. He didn't attack. He didn't push force. He opened the door to everything the entity had never experienced. Fear. Not the abstract awareness of danger, but human fear. The kind built from memory, pain, anticipation. The suffocating weight of being trapped. The certainty of loss. The knowledge of death, not as a concept, but as something personal. Inevitable. Layered. Chaotic. Contradictory. He flooded the connection with it. Images without form. Emotions without logic. Trauma without resolution. Everything that made the human mind unstable. The entity reacted instantly. Not with curiosity. With rejection. The pressure intensified, then fractured. The presence around K-17's mind destabilized, its structure flickering between states as if trying to process something it had no framework for. For the first time, it didn't understand. K-17 leaned into it. Harder. You wanted to know what we are? His thoughts burned outward. This is what we are. The reaction was immediate. Violent. In the physical world, every instrument in the facility surged. Lights exploded. Containment fields fluctuated wildly. Several technicians were thrown back as a shockwave, purely conceptual, yet physically manifested, rippled through the chamber. And then, it happened. The entity screamed. Not in sound. In distortion. Gravity warped. Space twisted. Reality itself buckled under the strain of something ancient experiencing something entirely new. Fear. And where that fear took hold, the entity broke. Not completely. Not fatally. But undeniably. Fragments of its presence collapsed inward, shedding pieces of itself like burning ash. The distortion field surrounding the facility flickered violently, then receded. In the chamber, K-17 gasped as the connection severed. His body convulsed once, then went still. Medical teams rushed in. He was alive. Barely. Dr. Cattry stared at the data, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from realization. We did it, she whispered. No one responded. Because every person in that room had seen it, measured it, confirmed it. For the first time since the entities arrived. One of them had been damaged. Not by weapons. Not by force. But by something far more dangerous. The human mind. Within hours, the data was transmitted to every remaining command center on Earth. The message was simple. Unbelievable. And undeniable. They can be hurt. Across the world, in cities half lost to distortion and skies that no longer obeyed the laws of physics. Humanity changed. Not in fear, but in understanding. We had spent centuries fearing the unknown. Imagining monsters. Surviving nightmares. Those nightmares had something to fear in return. The message spread faster than panic ever could. They can be hurt. It wasn't hope. It was something sharper. Purpose. For weeks, humanity had endured, survived by instinct, by denial, by sheer stubborn refusal to collapse. But now there was direction. A way forward. Not escape. Not defense. Retaliation. Dr. Khattri's work became the foundation of a new kind of warfare. The cognitive projection interface was refined, stabilized, weaponized. What began as a fragile experiment became a global initiative. They called the operators vectors. Not soldiers. Not pilots. Something else. Each vector was trained not just physically, but mentally, conditioned to access the deepest, darkest layers of human cognition without breaking. Psychologists, neuroscientists, and military strategists worked together to build something unprecedented. A weapon built from thought. From memory. From fear. The first coordinated strike took place over what used to be the Indian Ocean, a region now consumed by constant distortion, where reality folded in slow, endless waves. Satellites identified multiple entities overlapping in the area, their presence warping the planet's curvature itself. Before, humanity would have avoided it. We moved toward it. A fleet remained at a safe distance, not to attack, but to observe. To confirm what came next. Inside a reinforced carrier, 12 vectors were connected to synchronized CPI systems. Their neural patterns linked, amplified, focused into a single directed projection. Dr. Khatri stood behind the glass, watching the readings spike. "Remember," she said over comms, her voice calm but firm, "don't try to control it too much. Let it flow. Let them experience what we are." One of the vectors, call sign Hollow, let out a quiet breath. "They won't like it." "No," she replied. "They won't." The systems activated. 12 human minds reached outward. The entities noticed immediately. Distortion intensified across the ocean. The sky fractured into shifting geometries. Space itself resisted the intrusion of something unnatural. Not the entities. Something else. Humanity. For a brief moment, there was silence. Not physical. Conceptual. The vectors didn't project force. They projected experience. Plus. Isolation. The sound of a heartbeat in a silent room. The feeling of drowning with no surface. The memory of grief that never fully fades. The entities reacted violently. The ocean convulsed as their forms destabilized, folding in and out of existence in rapid succession. The clean, incomprehensible structures they maintained began to fracture under the weight of conflicting input. They couldn't process it, because it wasn't singular. It wasn't logical. It was human. Layered. Message. Contradictory. One of the entities lashed out, space bending inward as it attempted to sever the connection. Too late. The vectors pushed deeper. "You see us now?" Hollow's voice echoed, not through speakers, but through the very distortion field itself. "This is what you touched." The entity's presence buckled. And then, it broke. A tear formed in its structure, a visible collapse of whatever passed for its existence. Fragments peeled away, dissolving into nothing as the projection overwhelmed it. Across every monitoring station, the readings confirmed it. Another one. Damaged. Possibly destroyed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was stunned. Because for the first time, the entities didn't just react. They retreated. Across the globe, distortion zones began to shift, not expanding but pulling back. The vast, watching presences that had loomed at the edge of perception withdrew. Not completely, but enough. Enough to notice. Humanity saw it. And we understood. "They're afraid," someone whispered in a command center thousands of miles away. No one corrected them. Because the data supported it. The patterns matched. The behavior was unmistakable. The entities, beings that had consumed entire civilizations without resistance, were hesitating. Humanity didn't stop. We couldn't. Because now we knew something they didn't. They weren't untouchable. And more importantly, they weren't ready for us. Over the following days, operations expanded. More vectors. More projections. More controlled strikes into distortion zones. Each encounter ended the same way. The entities pulled back. Not out of strategy, out of uncertainty. Because every time they reached into the human mind, they found something worse than they expected. Not weakness, not collapse, but depth. Endless, unpredictable depth. We didn't just perceive them anymore. We forced them to perceive us. Fully. And it changed everything. The final recorded transmission didn't come from Earth. It came from beyond. Captured through the same anomalies that had first announced their presence, translated imperfectly by systems that struggled to interpret its structure. But the meaning was clear. What are you? For a long moment, no one answered. Not officially. Not with words. We didn't need to. Because by then, the response was already written, etched into the fabric of every encounter, every projection, every fragment of a broken god drifting in the void. Humanity answered the only way it ever truly had. Through action. Through persistence. Through defiance in the face of something greater. The next time the entities reached toward Earth, they didn't press inward. They stopped. At the edge. Watching. Waiting. Learning. Careful. Because now they understood something they never had before. Something no other civilization had ever shown them. Fear wasn't unique to lesser beings. It wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. And humanity was very, very good at using it. Far beyond the stars, beyond the edges of measurable reality, the entities withdrew into the dark between existence. Not defeated, not destroyed, but changed. And carrying with them a truth they would never forget. Even Eldritch gods bleed. And they had finally met the species that made it happen.